Hello, everyone. My name is GraceCarriagaBenavides, and this is my research called Methods of Improving Science Vocabulary Retention. So, my statement of the problem vocabulary is such an important part of learning scientific information. I know I always start my units with new vocabulary every single time. Usually, what I do, I give the students the vocabulary, they write it down, and then we move on. The next day, we do the same thing. We have anywhere from 35 to maybe 65 words per 6 weeks. So it does get to be a lot. And our students, even though I use this vocabulary on a daily basis, students don't always remember it. I do give them vocabulary tests, I tell them to study it. But of course, it just doesn't stick. Like I said, I do use it daily. And it's just something that's very important because if they don't understand the vocabulary, even the basics, they're not going to get the entire concept. So, a vocabulary again is very, very important. Just to quote Carrier from 2011, in order for students to develop scientific literacy, they need to gain a knowledge of science content and practice scientific habits of mind. This is impossible without knowledge of science vocabulary. So, my research question is: will having students draw a picture and produce a definition in their own words help them learn and retain vocabulary knowledge better in comparison to my traditional way of having them write the word and definition down and briefly going over it? So, my literature review, I found a lot of different researches that have already been done on this subject, on vocabulary. Um, According to Shore et al. 2013, the production effect, which is students talking to each other and producing their own definition versus writing a definition down from the board, will help students retain the meaning of the word. So, this is what I decided to do. I decided to do mine on them writing their own definition. Of course, I give them their original definition and then they come up with a picture. Now, other research also, every research that I looked at, it was something hands-on, whether they were drawing pictures, whether they were, making up their own definitions, or even on some of them learning it as a story, right, would help them with that retention. So there's been many different researches that have been done over the years for this topic. That's what makes vocabulary so important, that it is something that students do need. Um, According to Carrier, again, 2011, we assume that students learn just by writing vocabulary down and or just saying them out loud. However, they believe that any strategy using communication, having students talk to each other or drawing what the word means will help retain this science vocabulary. They believe that combined with science activities, any intentional vocabulary instruction would benefit both English proficient and English language learners as well. So, students need to be able to use their vocabulary in class to discuss with each other as well. Methodology. So, before I actually talk about my settings and participants, let me go ahead and say what I actually did for my research. So I always give my students vocabulary words every time we meet. They have about 4 to 6 vocabulary words, and they usually just copy them. They walk into my classroom. I already have them projected on my smart board. They grab their science journals. They write them down, write the definitions down, and they raise their hand when they're done. So I could go ahead and go sign all of them. That's my way of making sure that they're writing them down. Now, I don't only make them write them down. Of course, I go over all of the words every day and I give examples. And we do this on a daily basis. We have anywhere from 30 to maybe 65 words sometimes, depending on the unit that we're doing. Now, I notice, of course, that they're not retaining this vocabulary knowledge. So, what I decided to do with my research after all of the papers that I read, I decided I'm going to go ahead, give them the definition already with the word on a paper, and I'm going to have a section for them to write their own definition in their own words and also draw a picture. I did have them work in pairs, and it worked really well. So I chose one of my classes, my first period class, just because it's a little bit more convenient because they are one of my classes. And they came in here, they went ahead, and I told them what the assignment was. Some of them, of course, complained, being kids, but they did work very well. I walked around as they were doing it. Some of them asked me, Miss, I don't know how to draw a picture for this. So I allowed them to use a Chromebook and look up the pictures. So they were able to do that. Now, for the definitions, I just told them, it could be one, but you all make it up in your own words. How do you remember it? How will you figure it out? So that's what they went ahead and did. For 20 words, it took them, originally I had planned for one class period, which is about 45 to 50 minutes. And it took them a little longer than that. It did take about 2 class periods. So it was 2 days because I only have them, once a day. It took 2 days for them to finish that assignment. So that's how we did the research. We had already taken that test before, which was my pre-test, and they had done poorly on it. The majority of them had. And then we did the post test maybe a couple days after we finished the definitions. And they were allowed to take their papers home with their pictures, with their drawings, and with their own definitions. That way they could go ahead and study for the test. So my methodology. My setting took place at Roma Middle School here in Roma, Texas. It's a border town, deep South Texas, that consists of a population of about 11,561 people. Roma Middle School, we have 2 middle schools here in Roma, and Roma Middle School has a student population of 728 students in grades 6 through 8, with 265 students here in the 6th grade. The research was conducted by, of course, one 6th grade science classroom teacher, which was me. There were 6 classes throughout the school day that consisted of 16 to 25 students each that rotated throughout the day. Now, my participants, I did choose one class. It was a total of 23 students, ages 10 through 12. 43.5% were female and 56.5% were male. 100% were Hispanic. And out of those students, 97% are ESL students. And 25% of them actually do reside across the border in Miguel Alemán, which is our border town right next door to us. Now, my data collection, I did make the test myself. I used a pre-test, post-test, and I did make it myself. Let me see if you can see it if I click on it. Here it is. So it is just a test of 20 words. Here are I give them the definition, and they have a drop-down menu, and this is like a word bank that they can choose the correct answer from. Because I did pre-test, post-test, I did use the same exact test for both. Now, my data analysis. According to my data, if you look at figure 1, the mean, median, standard deviation, and t-score, my mean was a lot higher in my post-test, showing that students did do better on average. Their average grade was about 74.5, and in the pre-test, it was a 60. Same thing with a median. It was higher here at the post-test. Now, my standard deviation was a lot smaller by 7 points in my post-test, meaning that they did do better. And my t-score was 6.138. Now, according to figure 2, this is just a comparison, again, of the mean, so you could see it just next to each other. Again, my pre-test scores were at 60, and my post-test scores were at 75. So this histogram I like because it does compare both variables. You can see the frequency of the students that got certain grades. And if you notice, my post-test, I did not get a single 0 when in my pre-test, I did. I got students, I'm sorry, not 0, students with 20 or 20 grades of 20, which is unbelievable to me. I just can't fathom that. But then you could actually see my post-test. I had about 8 students that got between an 82. So you could see the growth right there. It was excellent. And my figure 4, this is actual student work that I did pick up. This is where they came up with their own definition and their own pictures. So, in conclusion, um, I believe my study is important because it will help. It did help me. I did notice a growth in my students' grades. They did a lot better. So, what I'm thinking is that next year I am going to start this right from the beginning of the school year. I'm going to implement the strategy where they come up with their own. And I did interview the students after, and a lot of them did say that they liked working in partners, right? The only thing, of course, that I have to do more is monitor them more closely to make sure they stay on track and that they are discussing the vocabulary words and not gossip of today's know what's. Um, but again, I will implement the strategies from the beginning of the year just to make sure that the students get it. The only limitation to my research that I saw was the consumption of time. I did notice that when I did my research, the strategy that I use, it did take almost two full class periods, and the way our time is scheduled, we don't have two class periods just to learn vocabulary, and that was only 20 words. So, what I need to do is train my students when they get here in the beginning of the year. You have 4 or 5 words only, then they come in, and that's the thing that they do as soon as possible. That way, we only take the 8 minutes that I usually allot for vocabulary, and of course, go over them as well. But I do want to extend my research to next year and maybe make it into a full year research. That way, I could see what my results would be. And of course, I believe that this would be beneficial to all. If I do well here in my class, then I could bring it up to my administrators, and maybe they could implement it in the 7th grade, or especially in the 8th grade, where they have to get all that vocabulary retention for STAR testing. If I help them here in 6th grade, it'll only help the students themselves in the 7th and 8th grade, because, like I tell my students, they're just building on their knowledge from 6th grade. So a lot of the vocabulary that they get to in the 8th grade, it's the same vocabulary we have here in the 6th grade. So if they actually retain that knowledge, that would be so helpful for them. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.